opening up. A couple more people coming in. Okay. Well, good evening. Not quite the neighborhood party yet, but it's getting there. We'll wait for just a second for Mr. Lenahan to get seated. Thank you for coming to the May 1st Planning Commission meeting, and we're glad you're joining us tonight. And tonight we have our Jamie Robichaud, who's going to be our secretary and take the minutes, and be our staff person too. So she's all in one tonight. So would the secretary please make note of the roll? Thank you. Up for first item of business is the Planning Commission minutes from April. Is there any additions or changes to the minutes?
Just the edit I mentioned earlier, Gregory Purple.
Noted.
Madam Chair, an item on page 11, third paragraph, is actually a Jeffrey Valentino question, but I think he was asking about pervious rather than impervious driveways in the context of the paragraph. So.
Oh, okay. Under the drainage?
Yes. Yeah, third paragraph from the top of page 11.
Okay, so it should be pervious.
Yeah.
Ready? Any other corrections or additions to the minutes?
Madam Chairman, I wish we move that we approve the minutes as slightly amended.
Thank you, Mr. Brenneman. Seconded by Mr. Wolf. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Minutes are approved unanimously. And the first item of business, and apparently the only item of business, is Homestead Country Club. And is the applicant here? Hi. Come on up to the mic.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dennis Holsing at 5009 West 68th Street in Prairie Village, Kansas. I'm going to bring Tyler Holloman up shortly, but want to do, should I start talking about it or I'm not? Okay.
Well, we wanted to introduce you and
Okay.
make sure that you were here.
Yep.
And my understanding is Mr. Brewster would like to bring us up to date on the additional changes that you have submitted to us.
Great.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to let him go first.
Yep.
But thank you for being here, and we will get back to you in a second. So, Mr. Brewster.
Yes, this is a continuation of the public hearing that was originally advertised for the March meeting and continued twice since then to address some of the issues that were originally raised. Just a reminder, this is a renewal of a special use permit. They have a current special use permit that was amended last in 2014 when the country club sold the eastern portion of it for residential lots and then readjusted that. What brings them back tonight to amend the special use permit is they're proposing a new structure and the addition to the clubhouse. And under the conditions of all special use permits and their previous one, any new structures require you to amend the permit. So that's what they're here for tonight. I do want to make a couple of corrections in my staff report. In the comments in reference to the tennis structure enclosure, which we'll see in their presentation, one of the original concepts had a canopy and openings on the south elevation. And when they moved the building from the first bank of tennis courts to the second, they updated the renderings, and I neglected to catch that in the report and take that out. So I believe they'll talk to that. I don't think that feature is still on the building, but it doesn't change the building substantially in our mind from the review. And then also there is a typo in subsection D when we're looking at the building setbacks for the clubhouse. And I made the comment that it would be 33 feet from the property line. The actual, it was supposed to say approximately 55 feet. That was an estimate based on Ames mapping data, and the applicants provided a dimension site plan which has more exact dimensions, which puts it, I believe, 57.89 feet. So just a correction on a typo there. When the application was continued, it was continued to look at a more detailed analysis of the drainage situation on the site, both existing and proposed. So that study was completed and reviewed by Public Works, and they have proposed some specific drainage strategies, which I believe Keith will be able to talk to if you have any specific questions. But basically, they're proposing a combination of rain gardens and underground detention to deal with the site runoff. The expansion of the clubhouse will be mainly a remodel, rehabilitation, and addition to closer to the south property boundary. It will bring the building up to approximately 7,000 square feet, a little more than that. And as I said, it will be approximately 55 feet from that property boundary. The largest new structure is the proposed tennis enclosure. It's located on the second bank of tennis courts, and it will replace the tennis bubble that they currently, under the current special use permit, is a temporary structure that they take up and down every year, and so this would be a permanent investment and a permanent structure. All of the proposed structures do meet the setback and height requirements for the R1A. In our criteria, we looked at some of the analysis of typical relationships of buildings, and so they do have a much larger setback than is required, but it's fairly typical of what you might find in a rear-to-rear yard relationship. We did look at some of the operational concerns that were raised at some of the neighborhood meetings. I believe you have the neighborhood meetings minutes in your packet as well, and the applicant will be able to update you on those. So we looked at the landscape plan and had some of our landscape architect had some recommendations for the perimeter. The original plans they submitted had a very detailed plan with the parking lot, which was the new investment, and that met his approval, but he suggested to relook at the perimeter. They have since submitted an updated landscape plan as well, so we haven't looked at it in detail, but it appears to be addressing all of our landscape architect's concerns, mainly dealing with the new structures that are being proposed in the relationship to the adjacent lots there. In our report, we've outlined the criteria that you are to review special use permits under. We do believe they meet all of them. One additional one that we did have some questions on that we can work out was regarding the parking. I believe one of our original counts was there was 105 spaces. I think there's actually 103. And then we also wanted to discuss what that would mean in terms of accessible spaces. By our count, there was only 2 there, and it looked like they probably, to meet the guidance, they should provide more, but that's something we can work with them and before they get to final plans. Our recommendation is to approve this special use permit as they meet all of the criteria in our opinion. We do have some conditions, again, several that they've already begun to meet with the updated submittal they've provided. And then the last condition is basically rolling in a lot of the conditions they're currently operating under. That condition 6 is just the list of ones. A couple of them I do want to point out we feel would no longer be applicable. Obviously, the permanent structure replacing the temporary tennis bubble, the seasonal enclosure, and then some updates associated with that. Other than that, we would recommend approval of this.
Mr. Holsing, would you like to walk us through your plans for the new country club?
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any concerns about the items in the recommendations from staff, let us know that.
Okay. I got bad hearing, so I apologize. I'm going to give you a little bit of background history on the club itself. The club was founded in 1954. It was founded from land that was donated by J.C. Nichols for a neighborhood club. Was his purpose. It sits on a little over 9 acres of land off of Mission Road across from 65th Terrace and Mission. The property was sold to my company, Holsing Enterprises, or 73016 LLC, in November of 17. One thing I want to add into that is prior to that, I want to give credit. know at least one of the members is here tonight, but the club was on life support years prior to that. A lot of concerned citizens within Prairie Village, actually, I call them, it's not their name, I made it up, but it's the Gang of 13. So 13 investors all put in either $50,000 or $100,000 each, and they put the club on life support. They ended up selling it to me. They didn't take a penny out of it. They got whole, but thanks to them putting on life support and putting the money into the club, and not just money, but a lot of passion, which you see throughout Prairie Village, they really kept the club afloat, which when I moved back to Kansas City, it gave us an opportunity to come in and be where we're at today. So I did want to give them credit for that. On the concept, it's similar to the concept of what I have with a couple clubs down in North Carolina. The concept is renovation and minor expansion of the current clubhouse itself, construction of a permanent tennis building to replace the existing seasonal bubble structure. It's not adding to any impervious space. It's just covering the impervious space that's there, but it gives us, I think, an opportunity and an advantage that doesn't exist within Prairie Village or anywhere near Prairie Village right now, which gives us the ability of having year-round play during evening, rain, etc. The reallocation of parking to comply with the City of Prairie Village codes right now, to comply with code, part of the existing tennis courts are used. So we're expanding the current parking and basically putting the existing tennis courts back into use. The club itself, prior to getting to that, the motto that we have both in Carolina and here is really it's where family and friends meet. It's what I grew up. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. It's community, for a place for people to get together in the community, to have an affordable club, and where family and friends meet. I'm a resident within Prairie Village, and my office will be located out there when the renovation's finished, as will our teams. So I would like to introduce, let me go back one step, sorry, the team. Rod Zerning, the general manager, back. Rod's right-hand person and my right-hand person, Becky Rodovsky, who's been with the club forever. Everybody here, I think, knows Becky. And then Brandon Boatwright is not here. He's the lead architect. He's located close by, and he does my projects all over the country. And then Tyler Holloman is leading construction. And I'm going to have Tyler come up and go through everything. And Jeff Hancock is here, the civil engineer, to answer any additional questions you have. Turn it over to somebody less smarter than me.
Are we on? Perfect. All right, well, hello, everyone. My name's Tyler Holloman with Frontier, and Dennis has asked that we just provide everyone with a overview of the project that we have here. So we'll start off with the plan. This is our proposed front elevation for the new building. As you can see, our proposal is to keep the existing roof line, or the two roof lines, and then add a roof pitch there at the entrance, just to make the club a little more appealing and just a little more cosmetically pleasing. The interior, as you can see here, we are proposing to leave the majority of the walls inside the existing club alone. There are a few that will be demoed to expand the fitness and the sitting area for the restaurant. The back addition, so on your screens, it would be the left side. That is the south addition of the clubhouse. And as you can see, we're proposing to put in some offices, yoga studio, kind of expand the clubhouse existing fitness facilities. This here is showing the elevations of the existing clubhouse. We are proposing to leave the majority of the siding and the cladding materials alone. We will be resurfacing anything that needs resurfaced. Everything will be repainted and cleaned up, and then the roof line will be completely removed, and we're proposing to put in a standing seam metal siding, which is what you see on a lot of buildings around town here, and just give it, again, a more modern look. The majority of the windows that are in place in the club right now will actually be left alone, and we'll be able to keep the features of the club the same while just giving the club a facelift. But as you can see, the back addition will be masked into the clubhouse where it looks like it's just one building, not two buildings pieced together. So you can see here, this is another mock-up of the front elevation. The roof line that I was speaking to earlier would be on your left side, the roof pitch, and then the flat roof that you see there is going to be over a seating area, over the expanded sitting area for the restaurant. The bottom left of the screen is the clubhouse as it appears today. Talk a little bit about the tennis building. We are proposing putting over where the existing bubble is a tennis building that will enclose the tennis courts that are located there. The area will not change at all, so the building will actually go up exactly over where the existing tennis courts are. So if you were to take the bubble footprint, that will be the footprint of the new building. As you can see, the building will be designed to match the new exterior of the clubhouse. The goal here is just, again, for everything to be somewhat uniform and cleaned up. The roofing materials will be standing seam as well to match the existing clubhouse. And then we'll have insulated wall panels and an updated or cleaned up exterior of that building. And we are proposing to have roll-up garage doors on both the front and rear elevations of that building. As you can see here, this is the lovely bubble structure that is in place right now. This will be replaced with this building here. But if we go back, you can see the footprint of that building will be the footprint of this building. So we're planning to put the building exactly where the bubble is located currently. Excuse me. Looking at the property, so we're moving on to the site plan here, and we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these areas more in depth, but just to give everyone an overview of the existing or of the property. If you look at the darker pink, that is the proposed parking expansion. The lighter colored pink at the top right, that is the existing parking as it sits right now. So the darker pink will be the expansion. The light blue is the tennis enclosure that will be going up on the third bank down of tennis courts. And then if you look at the bottom right, it's a little hard to see, but the country club is located there. The greener shades there is the areas that we're proposing to expand. And then we're also proposing to add 2 pickleball courts in between the raised tennis platforms between the new building and the existing country club. So we talked about some of this, but we are, like I said, proposing to add 2 of the pickleball courts between the existing platform tennis courts, an extension of the clubhouse. The majority of that will be on the south side, and we'll talk about our drainage concerns here. Those are the 2 pickleball courts. So again, the raised tennis platforms don't change, but we are proposing to add 2 of the pickleball courts in between the raised tennis courts. There you can see the extension of the clubhouse. Like I said, the majority of that is on the south and east side. There's a little bit, the upper left corner of that is the flat area, or the flat roof area above the outdoor seating area. Parking was actually why we delayed this. Earlier, we had our civil team work through some concerns both on the drainage study as well as working through to save as many of the existing trees on the property that we could. Our proposal is to add what is now the, I guess, a gray or lighter blue color there, while also saving the existing parking lot. And we're going to save as many of the trees, which I believe this plan saves 3 of the big, or the large trees in the front of the building here. We do have more than we do address more, or have more parking than is required. We're able to rework this and have plenty of parking. And we were also able to address all drainage concerns with this new layout. Currently, the first bank of tennis courts is being used for parking. So if you look on this diagram here, that is the pink shade, or the, I guess, purple shade, so that this shows what is being used currently for parking. This is just another diagram of what would actually be the expanded parking lot. And so again, our future parking is just the dark pink and the lighter pink or purple color there. We have worked with the city extensively on landscaping as well. The majority of the concerns we heard from both our neighborhood meeting and then from the city was screening concerns and landscaping concerns, and making sure that we adequately landscape, not just what is being proposed, but all buildings. And so as you can see here, we are working to save as many trees as possible, as well as adding in additional screening behind the tennis platforms, the expanded country club, the parking lot, the north end of the parking lot, and the edge of the permanent tennis enclosure. Talk a little bit here about drainage. This is just a satellite aerial view of the proposal that we have for drainage, as well as and again, Civil can talk more on this than I can, but this is the areas that we came up with for our drainage study calculations. And another drawing would be this here, which is just taking out the aerial view, but again, the site view of any drainage that we are proposing. We were able to address all drainage concerns with this plan by, as Chris mentioned earlier, by a combination of rain gardens and some underground detention to make sure that we meet all drainage concerns. And that is all I have for you. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if you have any technical questions, Jeff is here with Civil and can talk to those too as well.
I'm sorry, sir, it's not public hearing yet, so when we get to that point, we'll let you ask a question. I was just making a note for myself. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Holloman yet? Mr. Burkle?
In respect to the detention under the parking lot, how much is going in there?
Jeff, do you have those figures? You can see the darker area underneath the parking lot. I don't know the exact amounts.
Yeah, so the system that's being proposed is what's called a manifold system. It'll be 3 circular pipes that are 36 inches in diameter.
Okay.
Total length of all the pipe together is about 200 feet of it.
Sorry, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yep,
and
sure.
speak into the microphone so everybody in the audience can hear you?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Hancock, and I'm with SMH Consultants. I'm the civil engineer associated with the project.
Thank you.
And so I don't know if I need to respond again, but basically there's 200 feet of 36-inch pipe that's underground that's being utilized to accomplish some of the detention, with the remainder of it being accomplished in the rain gardens.
Coming off is that detaining what's coming off the parking lot or greater than that?
Part of it's coming off of the parking lot. Part of it's coming off of I guess it'd be the east side of the building, and part of the grass area. Some of those lines are very hard to see on there, but yeah, some of the pickleball courts, the new pickleball courts, some of that's being detained as well.
Okay, so is that getting treated with the rain gardens and then it's going into that detention?
Some of it is, not all of it.
Okay, and when it comes out of the detention, is it coming out into the storm sewer via a smaller pipe? Is that how you're handling that?
Not exactly. So it all connects to an existing inlet, and that existing inlet will have an orifice plate placed on it, so basically a steel plate, and we will limit the diameter of the outflow at that plate to 6 inches in diameter.
Okay, and that's been all approved by the city? Okay, okay. For the rain garden, how is the maintenance being provided? And explain how that's being done for the next, because you have to maintain them, right?
Yeah, there is maintenance associated with rain gardens. I don't think we've got that far in
Okay.
our process and planning yet, but there is maintenance to make sure that they still allow water to infiltrate, they still clean water. I mean, obviously, they accumulate trash and debris, that's the intent, and so somebody will need to take care of picking up that trash and debris and those sorts of things.
Are these amended soils, or is it just rain garden material?
These will be amended soils.
They are. Okay. I find those very hard to maintain. I don't know how we make sure that happens.
Things we do yearly at Public Works.
Self for the
Yeah.
audience.
Keith Brady Hoff, Public Works Director. One of the things we do at Prairie Village for detention ponds and our water quality improvements that are made on these sites, we do require an engineer to certify their functionality on a yearly basis. So they have to go out and evaluate them and make sure they're still functioning.
That's ongoing.
Every year we ask for that.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Brenneman?
And looking at the notes from the first meeting back in January, you've noted that there were 3 phases, and yet I only see description about 2 phases. What's in the 3rd phase?
Yep, so actually this is all 3 phases combined. The phases that we had mentioned earlier were more construction phases, and those phases still exist. And that is, we're going to walk through some of the construction with the owner and with our construction teams, but all 3 phases are encompassed in this application here.
What is in each phase?
So again, I don't have those notes in front of me, but the gist of it is phase 1, in order to not interrupt operations at the club during the busy summer months. Phase 1 is going to be as soon as we can work with the city and get a permit. We're going to work on pouring the back addition of the country club and begin the process of erecting the tennis enclosure. Phase 2 will be finishing out the tennis enclosure, finishing out the back addition, and moving operations from the club to the back addition, so essentially opening up the back addition. Phase 3 will be expanding the parking lot, redoing the exterior of the building, and just buttoning everything up. But
How long would those 3 phases do you project will take?
we are proposing to have everything done by November of this year, which is a aggressive time frame, but we're going to work, assuming that permitting goes well, and then we're going to have subs lined up and move quickly on it.
Okay.
All 3 building phases?
That's our proposal.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Burkle?
Adding lights for the pickleball courts, and I'm concerned any kind of light bleeding out into the south or the north, and you are at a higher level and controlling that. How is that being, because it's not just a light level, it's any light that's coming off of that. I know there were some time frames that were put in there, but if somebody comes in after the time frames, can they override the clock? If you could address that, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
nope, that's all great questions. Some of those are going to be operational questions as far as if somebody can come in. The club would have to speak to that. As far as us putting the lights in, our proposal is, of course, the screening will help with any light pollution that happens coming off of those. We're also have worked or started to engage suppliers of tennis court lighting that have downward lights that project downward and not just a typical street light that just shines out. So we are going to work with them to get some specialized lighting in there to keep that light pollution down.
Mr. Brewster, do you have any more comments before I open it up for public hearing? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so now I will open this up for a public hearing. I would appreciate you keeping your comments down to 3 minutes. If you have a representative who will be speaking on behalf of the neighbors, I will extend additional time for that speaker. So I'm anxious to hear from you.
Good evening.
And your name and address.
I'm Mary Ann Murray Simons. I live at 4110 Homestead Drive, have been at that location for 22 years, and have lived in Prairie Village since coming to Kansas City in 1981. My home is located directly behind the south extension of the clubhouse building as proposed. I'd like to start by thanking all of you and the city for overseeing a thorough review of this application in support of neighborhood concerns related to 3 issues: water runoff caused by impermeable tennis courts and structures on the site, light pollution from the tennis and raised tennis courts, and evergreen landscaping to both screen Homestead from the neighborhood and provide sound buffers. Many of us have attended public meetings that Homestead has held to gather input and comment about the issues that impact our surrounding homes. And at this point, if it's all right with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to have residents from Indian Fields who are here this evening stand and be recognized, because not everyone is planning to speak. For those who are able to stand. Thank you very much. Mr. Holsing has said that he wants to be a good neighbor, and we are really pleased with that spirit of cooperation. And we appreciate that he has followed through with his commitment to provide a drainage plan that will retain on-site water created by both the existing and new buildings, the tennis courts, and the parking lots. We ask that the city assure that the planned drainage provides a system that will retain runoff on the Homestead Country Club grounds and out of our yards and homes. During and after construction, we are hopeful that the city will continue to monitor site drainage to protect surrounding properties. Also, we would recommend that the Planning Commission consider adding a requirement before approving this plan that would add a berm around the south, north, and west perimeter to contain any additional stormwater runoff. Regarding lighting around the new tennis building and the new pickleball courts, we know from the existing courts, particularly the raised tennis courts, that high-profile lighting poles spill bright light into the neighborhood, particularly on the south and west sides of the property. Additional lighting to support the pickleball courts and the new tennis building could exacerbate the existing problem. I was really happy to hear Tyler just say that they'll be working with tennis professionals to be able to get directional lighting on existing courts as well as the new courts. And we thank the city for making sure that all of that moves forward in a very directional way, because I've heard from comments made during question and answers that you all are concerned about that as well. On the south side of the existing clubhouse, a 30-foot extension is being proposed that will abut my backyard as well as my neighbors to the east. Based on Mr. Holsing's promise to maintain green space throughout the club grounds, we're hopeful that significant screening will be added on the south side of the new building extension. From my standpoint, the existing trees on the south side of the clubhouse really provide no screening or sound attenuation whatsoever. Significant improvements along the south perimeter of the clubhouse extension and the new tennis building are critical for maintaining our neighborhood. We also hope the city will apply the new neighborhood design guidelines it's considering for R1A and R1B properties, both residential and commercial, that will maintain the character of our neighborhood. In addition to maintaining as much green space as possible, assuring that the south-facing addition be designed with windows as proposed will face the structure rather than large unbroken walls that would be facing toward the south perimeter. Screening that perimeter, as mentioned previously, of the entire club with mature evergreen trees of a certain height, width, and caliber to both screen our homes from the club as well as serve as sound barriers is a must, and we appreciate your understanding and enforcement of that. We look forward to Homestead Country Club continuing in the next phase of its life. We want it to be beneficial for the city and for our neighborhood, and we ask the city to be diligent in its oversight of the expansion plan and the construction of these new facilities as it impacts the quality of life that we all chose when we moved to Indian Fields. We appreciate your thoughtful consideration and your support.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during the public hearing? Thank you. Please give us your name and address.
Larry Goldstein. I live at 4101 Delmar Drive. My wife and I have been there for 50 years. I want to thank Keith at Public Works for being helpful in providing current information and proposals in regard to the Homestead expansion plans. I also have engaged a consultant engineer to review the plans. I personally want Homestead to succeed, but not at the expense of the 27 adjacent property owners. Here are some present concerns. We've had water entering our home from Homestead parking lot on 2 occasions, flooding our house, and on 7 occasions, that it came within a 16th inch from entering our house. Homestead has, in the past, allowed music bands with loud noise as late as 2 a.m. Homestead Club has not addressed the tennis court light issue to direct light onto the courts and not spreading out into the neighbors' yards. Homestead does not keep the grounds clear of leaves, debris, tree limbs, which block the intake of water into the stormwater 36-inch drain system. I have, as well as other customers, had to clean out these areas. As to the concerns of piles of dirt during construction, the dirt should have tarps over the dirt at all times, and certainly at the end of the workday. The stormwater drainage plan does not mention creating berms around the entire property erected by the fences at all the adjacent owners. We were told at the original meeting that this would be built. Where will the trash containers be housed? Hopefully not in my backyard fence where they're presently located, with the lids almost always completely open. Also, why allow pickleball courts? It's just more impervious ground. I think we're all familiar with the Evan Talon new home project, where adjacent homes to the north are still waiting for the berm swell to be completed. What they did was to cut down all the trees, vegetation, raise the surface by 4 feet, and stop working. Meanwhile, the adjacent homes on the north side receive the rain downpours from the elevated land. In conclusion, I think no permit should be approved until all plans are drawn, including stormwater drainage, construction engineering plans, and landscaping plans. And all the plans then need to be reviewed by Prairie Village Public Works, Prairie Village Public Consultant, and then any property owners' consultants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Anyone else like to speak? All right, give us your name and address, please.
Yes, my name is Drew Keller. I live at 5201 West 68th Street. I am a Homestead member, and I've been on the board for the past few years with a lot of these folks sitting over here. And I was the president last year when we sold the club to Dennis. The club has thrived for many, many decades, and it even was thriving in the 80s when I grew up there. But in the past decade, it's been a real struggle. And there are dozens of families that live in Prairie Village that have put in their skills, their resources, their time, their energy, their legal expertise, their financial acumen to keep the club alive. And I'm sure you know some of the history, but the club had to take on debt, then they had to restructure debt, then they sold the front property, and then a few years ago, a few of us got together and pooled our own money and personally guaranteed the land until we could find the right owner and the right investor. And we found that with Dennis. And he now has the capital and the resources and the skill set and background to fix the club and to make it what we want today. And I acknowledge some of those concerns. And what I see here is mostly fixing what exists. There isn't much addition here. There are 2 pickleball courts, but they're in between the paddle courts. The club's only getting a few feet wider, and it's still 50 feet from the property. And so I would just like to make sure we focus on the fact that this is mostly a remodel. There's not a whole lot that we're doing here. And I hope that I feel like with the engineering study, the club has done a good job of addressing the drainage concerns. So I just wanted to thank you for your time and just make sure everybody understands that there are lots of people in Prairie Village that have been working hard to keep this place alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Anyone else who would like to speak? Come on up.
I'm Marty Levy. I live at 6521 Granada Drive, and I'm president of the Indian Fields Homes Association. And I want to say that I totally endorse what Mary Ann and Larry have said. And just to let Dennis and everybody know that the Indian Fields neighborhood wants to be good neighbors, and we expect Dennis and what he does with Homestead to be good neighbors. And Indian Fields, we're very, very proud of our neighborhood. Everybody who lives there works very hard to maintain the neighborhood. And I think with everybody working together, Indian Fields and Dennis and his crew, we can have an incredible area that everybody can be proud of. And obviously, we want to maintain our property values, so we just ask that everybody do what they say they're going to do so we can make everything a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. Anybody else? Oh, I knew there'd be someone. Come on down.
Hi, Chuck Searle, 6624 El Monte. Have been at the club for 9 years, served on the board for 3. Appreciate the comments that were made on behalf of Indian Fields. I just want to make sure that we clarify there's a lot of members of the Indian Fields neighborhood that are here today, members of the club, and also very supportive of this plan. So I'd like those people to stand, if you don't mind, and also recognize that many of them live on the north, south, and west side of these lines. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Searle. Anybody else? Come on down.
Good evening. My name is Mike Lasan, and I'm at 4102 Homestead Drive. So my backyard is the pool area. And I just want to say that, I have 3 young children. We moved into the neighborhood. We've been a member of Homestead for 6 years. Everything that Drew and Chuck and everybody's been saying is we really have pooled our resources, our time, our energy to make the club thrive. I appreciate everything everybody said. I for one, have not heard loud music. The lights don't bother me. They're right in my backyard. I, for one, do not want homes or deforestation or any additional building done. I would like the remodel. I think it's going to be great for the club. And I hear a lot of positive feedback from the neighbors and from the people in the community. So I would just like to say, as somebody that backs Homestead, I'm all for this plan. And I think it's nowhere but up from here. So I appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lasan. Anyone else? Okay. Come on down.
Hey, I'm Sue Ann Heim, and I live at 4009 Delmar Drive. And I've been in front of you all a lot with the Evan Talon debacle. And I think, unfortunately, these guys are riding in on the back end of us having a sour taste in our mouth. I too am a member of Homestead and have been for 11 years. So I am way, way in their court. I really, really want Homestead to survive, to thrive, but not at the expense of my house, not at the expense of my yard. I don't want my house values to depreciate at all. And what happened with Evan Talon, they will. So if we can make sure that that doesn't happen, if that all promises that are made are really followed up on, I think that Keith and all the guys and girls there have seen that we're very serious about what happens, and we want Dennis to really succeed. I mean, he seems like a great guy, and everybody that put in their money, good for them. But that is not to the point of us not seeing my yard flood again, not seeing Mr. Goldstein's yard flood again. And that's what happened. And yes, absolutely we have light pollution. Yes, absolutely we have sound pollution. Yes, absolutely we had cars parking in the yard behind my house. Those things happen. Dennis has said they won't happen again. We hope that's true. Please, let's put the structures in place that say, here's what's okay, and we'll hold them to those conditions. The city will do their part, and then we'll all be happy and glad that the club is surviving. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Hine. Anyone else? Last call. If you change your mind, this is it. This is the last time you're going to get to speak. Okay, seeing no one else, I'm closing the public portion of the meeting. The public hearing is now closed. So, we've heard comments from the neighbors and from the members, and does anyone up here have some questions for either Tyler Holloman or Jeff Hancock?
100-year flood, and that's kind of the standard. But with some of the last 3 to 4 years where we've had 500-year floods, how is that change of precipitation? Is there additional things that can be done to verify that things don't flood in the future, and simply be able to do something that would prevent some of that water from coming down into the yards of the neighbors?
I think you're asking if we have larger than 100-year storms, what happens out there? You know, I would say that's no different than most locations in and around Prairie Village. We've got drainage systems that run in and around Prairie Village, and our systems work pretty good for most events. But you're right, if we have events in excess of 100-year floods, we're going to have lots of problems that a lot of us have never seen. This would be no different. It's the study shows to a 100-year storm that it will detain the water that it needs to, and then release the water through the new 36-inch pipe that we installed with the Evan Talon development that takes it out to the ditch on the north side of Del Mar. That pipe is significantly larger than the pipe that was in there before. So I think the condition that exists now is better than it's been in a long, long time for that area. But when storms potentially can happen at higher rates, they can. Luckily, they're not very frequent. That sometimes there can be additional flooding that can happen to roads and homes throughout Prairie Village. So in a nutshell, I guess that's how I'd answer your question.
think on that note, directional lighting has been a topic from several of our speakers and the potential of spillage. So, and I know that with the new lights that are available, they can be very directed and not provide the spillage into the neighborhood. And also the ones that are currently there should be replaced with heads that also do not create spillage, that are directional into the parking lots and the like, so that they're not bothersome and polluting the neighbors' yards. And so you can, would you agree to that also, that it would? Would you come up to the,
We're planning on adding lighting to the fourth bank accords, which is the furthest down, and yes, directional lighting will be done for those. I don't know, we have not researched changing the lighting on the first bank accords, but I will commit to, at a minimum, that we will put timers on to where they'll be shut off at 10 p.m.
okay,
On the first bank. I don't know whether those can be
the first bank
adapted.
being the ones that are already in place?
The ones that are already in place. So all the new ones that are added, when we add new poles and lighting, those will be directional lighting. The first bank accords are tennis court lights, but they're not the most modern tennis court lighting. I don't know whether those poles and the heads can be adapted. I don't know whether we've researched it, but if they can be adapted and you can just change the heads, then the answer is yes, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank
But
you.
anything new will be added that way.
All right. Also, is there any other questions for the applicant? I have questions on the finish of the new buildings. Are those prefab panels that are like baked on, pre-painted, or are these ones that you have to paint and will eventually peel? Because I know that peeling paint has been a problem in the past.
Yep, so all of the panels for the new tennis enclosure, those will be prefab panels. They're essentially an insulated panel that lock in place and lock together. So those will not need painted. The existing country club, we are proposing to repaint what's on that building.
Okay. You're not planning on putting any type of siding or anything up on that then that would be pre-finished?
On the existing building, no. We're planning to repaint the existing siding and there's some brick on the existing building, and we're planning to leave that brick there as well.
Okay.
Now, on the addition to the existing building, that will be siding, and it will be siding to match what's on the building, and we will paint all of that.
Okay. And you mentioned insulation, which was something that I was concerned about, because within the tennis courts, there's a lot of sound being created with the rackets and the balls bouncing and off the walls and possibly off the ceiling. Can you describe what the insulation will be like, and so what you're doing to prevent noise pollution?
Yep. So on the
Around the inside of the
Let's get to the microphone so it,
Yeah, on the inside of a tennis court, tennis building, you'll have tarping. So if you have a player like me that's not as good as most of these guys, and I hit the tarp, the noise doesn't go past the tarp and into the building, so you don't hit the building. The ceiling itself will have tarping and also insulation within it.
we'll have what?
Tarp, it will be.
A tarp? Okay.
It'll be banded insulation on the inside of the building.
Okay, alrighty. The other thing that came up, I heard a couple of times, is berming on the on the southwest and, was it north? Yes, north, south, and west perimeters. And you've given us a landscaping plan, but I cannot tell if there's any berming planned. Obviously, you're gonna have some leftover dirt, and this would be a perfect place to put it.
That was something that was discussed at the neighborhood meeting. Does the drainage study require any berming, or are we?
I mean, I don't know the history, so take this with a caveat, but there is some berming already on the south side, we noticed, and there's some berming on the north side, but what we were planning was no additional berming. I mean, obviously, we're gonna do whatever our client tells us to do, so that was our plan so far, was no more berming.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to no berming associated with the landscaping.
I'm not familiar with what is currently there. I have not walked the perimeter of the field, but I know that some of the landscaping has been an issue with the previous ownership, and that they would plant, but then not maintain or replace. And so my question, I guess, is if you're going to remove dead vegetation and add new, would this be the time to consider a little bit of berming to hold the water onto the homestead property? And Mr. Breedhoff, maybe you have some thoughts on that. And this is just questions.
Our approach was that if berming was required by a civil engineer, then we were most certainly going to do berming. If it's not required, if the guys who do this for a living are telling us that it's not going to do any good, I don't know that we were going to do it.
I don't know that it'll do any good, maybe for drainage purposes, but it will be for sightline, and might be able to put some vegetation on top of the berms, which would provide a little bit more landscape.
As you can see from the
appeal.
landscaping part of the presentation, when he goes back to that,
that's
on the
great.
landscaping
Thank you.
part, there's significant landscaping that's being added. I can tell you that will be maintained because unlike in the past, or like most clubs, there's your investment is a monthly amount, but you're not responsible for whether the club survives or dies, right? And lives or dies or thrives. And landscaping is extremely important if you want to be successful, especially in the club business. And it will be maintained. I know that you're correct. There was not just years, but decades of trees that were dead that I'm shocked did not fall down and hurt somebody or hurt a house. And those have been cleaned up and removed. And there will be an annual maintenance of that. And if a tree dies, we'll remove it and we'll replace it. So that I can attest to. I'm not a civil engineer. I left it to these guys to put together a civil engineer. But I do run business, and we will want to maintain the beauty of the club, which is an integral part in the success of the club.
Thank you. Mr. Breedhoff, do you have anything you'd like to say about this?
I don't, other than, from a drainage standpoint, we don't see any need to berm to control the water other than what's shown already. From a landscaping or a aesthetic standpoint, or berm for another purpose is separate from what we would be involved with, so.
That would not help with the drainage and to keep the water within the country club. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Correct.
Last one? Go ahead.
One question. On the club building itself, directly south there on your landscaping plan, looks like the landscaping stops about halfway toward the east side of the building. Why didn't you extend landscaping on down further? And could you? That would give you a little bit more of a buffer between the building and the neighboring backyards. Yeah,
Southeast or southwest?
southeast.
I believe we have a pool fence on the southeast side, so we're proposing to stop that at the pool boundary. Is that correct? Yeah. So we're proposing to bring the landscaping up to the existing pool fence.
No, what I'm talking about is this area down in here. This is existing, I don't see anything new down in here where you extended the building about 30 feet.
Mr. Brenneman, what would you propose that they do?
I think it's,
Could add some additional landscaping down there, again, to provide a buffer.
I think it's actually there. I think just when the PowerPoint got put together, it got clipped off, but if it's not, I can assure you we'll screen that into the building. It's not
Okay.
a significant thing to do that. So when the city approves the final plans, I'm sure they can assure that it's showing there. Yep.
All righty. Mr. Brewster. Under, have you read, I'm sorry, Mr. Holsing and Mr. Holloman, have you read the recommendations? And are you in agreement with the recommendations that have been proposed as of now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Brewster. I have a question on item number 6H. Special use permit will be approved for an indefinite period of time. However, if discontinued or abandoned, the special use permit will expire in accordance with the section and its number, expiration of special use permits. We just had an issue with a special use permit, and we talked about it only having like a 5-year length of time. And I'm a little uncomfortable with the indefinite period of time, even with oversight, because I hate to bring the baggage of the previous owners of Homestead onto the new owner, but I think this is cautionary on our part to set a limitation and have them come back and renew the special use permit after a period of time, or after staff has agreed that there is no issues and can extend it maybe for another 5 years or 10 years. So there's my concern, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, that's often done with special use permits, so you all are used to dealing, particularly new ones, dealing with those time limits. However, just 2 reminders on this one. This is a current, everything under 6 is what the current special use permit is under. So that indefinite period of time has already been granted to this one, and they're
Yes,
back to
but we
renew.
have a new owner.
Right, they're back to renew. That still carries over with the new owner. What they're doing, though, with the new buildings is what's renewing this one. So there would be an opportunity to do that. I was merely carrying over the existing conditions for the current special use permit on that. The additional thing is, for any of the concerns we've heard tonight, if they're not following through or if there becomes property maintenance issues, the whole nature of special use permits, the city has the right to go revoke them if they can't get a response to conform with any of these requirements. And I understand your point of, well, we don't want to be in a position where we have to go proactively revoke the permit, that perhaps there's a time limit to come revisit to make sure everything's that's been promised here is being taken care of. With that, I think what we typically, I believe the code starts with a 5-year for most of them, and then in 5 years they have to come back and revisit issues. So just offer that out. The reason it made the staff report was, as it is it's an existing condition, and we didn't see any problem with continuing under a city enforces as need be situation.
I do see a problem. I think with the new ownership and the promises that are being made, I think we should limit the first maybe 5 years so that we can make sure that the landscaping is corrected, that everything that they have said that they would attend to will be done, and they can come back, and then we can maybe go with an indefinite or a 10-year or whatever, based on that. And like I said, this is a new owner. I think we talked about this with another building with a new owner, that the special use permit did not necessarily go with the land, it went with the owners. So I would suggest a 5-year period of time.
They'd have to come back and ask us for a renewal, is what you're saying.
Right, after having gone through the checks with code enforcement to make sure that everything is, all the plants are living, et cetera, so. And that they have followed through with their directional lighting and everything, so, everything that they've promised tonight. So I have not been able to go back through this long list of recommendations, but I would also like to ask about,
Yes, the applicant, I'd like to hear them on that issue.
yeah,
If you do a special use permit on a building, I mean, I can understand special use permit on landscaping or the ability to enforce landscaping or the ability to enforce what we've done. But a special use permit on a building would never allow somebody to get lending on a building. You can't, I'm saying with the time limit. If you had a 5-year time limit, it'd be like, it's like a land lease. If you don't have at least 30 years on a land lease, if you have a building on that, you can't get a loan on a building that has less than 30 years on a land lease. So with a special use permit that you're suggesting or recommending that would have a 5-year time frame, is basically, unless I'm misunderstanding, it's basically saying,
which is renewable, but.
well, but that's what
long
I'd
as
ask,
you're-
as long as there's special, as long as there was a caveat to saying, you know, that I'm not meeting certain things, then it's revocable based on that, instead of it being that I have to go back and renew it, because then that doesn't, then basically it's saying you gotta start all over, and if somebody wants to tear the building down or start all over, then they can tear it down.
No,
But
I
but I
don't
think
think
if it's
that is-
revocable based on me not living up to my promises, I'm all for that. So I would ask that it be put into a different way of saying, which I think is what the idea of a special use permit is anyway, unless I'm wrong. So a special use permit is saying that if you don't live up to it, it can be revoked. And I can live with stronger language, but to have an end date on it on a building, you would never be able to make long-term plans.
Okay, thank you.
So Chris, can we do a special use permit in such a way that we give them no time limit on the building, but give them a 5-year of maintenance?
I think by nature of special use permits, it's difficult to separate, because what it is it's a promise to continue to live up to the standards that are subject to the original approval. So whether the building's there or not is almost irrelevant to, are they operating in a way that they've promised. So what the applicant stated is that those limits do cause financing issues. I'm not entirely familiar with them, but it is something we hear often. I think the most recent time this occurred, what the previous applicant that brought up the same concern was concerned with was, I think what this applicant mentioned, is they don't want to come back in and have to be revisiting the whole idea of, is this a good idea or not? So if you recall, the last one, the renewal period was only subject to evaluating whether they lived up to the conditions you've approved. So in other words, our staff report went through all those A through F in the ordinance criteria. We're assuming those are all established. And so what the renewal would simply to be revisiting, did they meet the conditions and promises for operation in landscape and design? That might be a way to address both sides of this concern. I don't know if that meets what the applicant's concerned with on the building itself, but that's what we did
Just
last time.
Some additional wording then in,
Yeah,
in item H?
Item H might read, the special use permit is granted for a period of 5 years due to new ownership and the new investments in the property. At the end of that 5-year period, the special use permit will be reevaluated to ensure that all conditions of this approval are met. So what that would do is that would shift it out of the ordinance being looked at of should this club even be there or not, and it would simply look at have they lived up to their promises.
And that is really my intent, is to make sure.
And I think for the applicant's benefit, for the lender's benefit, I would even say the special use permit shall be renewed if the applicant is in compliance with all conditions. I think that should give a lender plenty of comfort.
Shall be renewed.
Shall be renewed if they're in compliance with all.
I think your special use permit is not for a specific building. It's for the overall operation of the property, which includes everything on there.
The other thing that we haven't talked about is the parking. And it seems to be a floating number. We've gone from 105, and I think the last number I've heard was 103 parking spaces. Is that correct?
That's what we counted on this most recent submittal, and I think that was probably what was on the original one, and it was just a difficulty in counting them, so I don't know if they can provide an exact number. This use in general under the previous approvals was, the ordinance doesn't really address a use like this in with any degree of certainty. So what the planning staff did with the previous approval was they looked at all of the components of the site and factored in sharing and efficiencies, looked to other city ordinances for each component of those, and came up with a required count of 98 under the previous permit. And so they're above that requirement that was looked at previously, so we figured that same analysis held.
And how are we basing, we don't have a basis at all, is what I'm hearing from you? Because at one time, I think Mr. Hulsing mentioned that they were going to be looking at 1,000 new members. Is that correct, Mr. Hulsing? Is my memory serving me correct?
Not 1,000 new members. My goal would be to cap it at 1,000 members total, because I don't think that
Okay,
the club
1,000
would
members.
survive that.
I
Yeah,
remembered that number,
which is very
though,
close to
correctly.
when the club was in its heyday, it was close to 800. But when somebody asked me, what do I see as a cap, that would be, I don't see the club approaching 1,000 members. That'd be nice, but that,
That'd be
I'm very
swell, wouldn't it?
realistic. But I think that if it ever got towards that, then we would cap it, because we wouldn't have places for them to park or things like that. So.
Okay. Is that a, something that we would want to recommend, or do we care? Anybody? Okay. When you have, let's say you have a big tournament or something, would you be providing any alternate parking, like off-street, and then maybe some busing from Indian Hills or the shopping center or something like that, or
Yeah.
church parking lot? Have you addressed anything like that? Would you come to the mic and give us your name and address, because we'd love to hear from you. Come on down.
I am Becky Ludovici. I've been with the club since 2000, so for 17 years. We have a very good
Becky,
relation.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, your last name?
Ludovici.
Ludovic.
Ludovissie.
I think I do remember you.
I try.
And would you please give us your address and who you're with?
Oh, my work address or my home
Doesn't
address?
matter.
All right. The work address is 4100 Homestead Court at Homestead Country Club.
Thank you.
I am currently the marketing, well, what am I? I have a lot of hats. We'll just do your utility player. So I've been there for 17 years, run quite a few different things, but we do have a pretty good standing relationship with both the Prairie school, or actually Indian Hills School, which is next door to us, so anytime we need overflow parking, we're happy to submit an application with them through their school. We're very familiar with that, providing shuttles that would go back and forth. We have a very good relationship with Village Church as well. So we have overflow parking on both sides that we can capitalize if needs be.
Okay. And I just want to ask if there's any appetite for that being in the recommendations, so that there's not parking on the grass or anything like that. Just throwing it out there.
Believe me, we don't want people parking in the grass
Yeah, I
any more
mean,
than you
know,
do.
You get the grass growing, you don't want to park on it, so, I know.
We don't
Okay.
like that.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant?
So, Madam Chair, if there are no other questions. Sure.
Are you planning to provide more handicap parking places? You're only showing 2, and I think for a facility this size, you'd have to provide 5.
Whatever the requirements are, which I don't know those off the top of my head, but if the requirements
So
are
if you
5.
go with 5, you're gonna lose part of your 103.
Right, you'd be down closer to probably 100.
Yeah.
Especially if you have the size of 101, probably by adding 3 more, you'd lose 2 others, so.
And we do have confirmation, there are 103 as total stalls is what we're proposing.
And that includes the 5?
That includes the 2 accessible stalls. So 101 regular, 2 accessible for a total of 103.
Okay. So in 6A, we have required parking spaces of 98. So do we want to leave it at 98, so if they need the 5 additional 3 handicapped, that 98 will still cover it?
Yep, that'd be fine.
Okay?
You wanna make certain that they will provide the additional spaces.
That was our intent with number 5, to work within that range to get to the appropriate level for ADA guidance. The other part of that is a lot of the ADA guidance is based on just a pure count that bumps you up to threshold. So there is some, I think there's probably some interpretation of what makes sense for this use that can be done under that ADA guidance as well. So we didn't want to predetermine a specific number of spaces. We wanted to make sure, based on their needs, if we were within the guidance. And from our count, we were going to be able to meet at least 100 spaces, even if they provided the 5 accessible.
Okay, so we have that settled? Okay. Item F and item H need to be combined, apparently. Under 6F and 6H, it says that the special use permit shall run with the land, and then we just changed it. So do we want to eliminate F? It's kind of redundant and negates what we just did. D? That's just a description of the.
Well, but it restricts what they can do to the property. Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. Why wouldn't we want F? What if there's a developer? You want to comply with the land.
So you're suggesting that that should stay in?
Yeah, you
Okay.
want these obligations to work.
Okay. All righty. This is where I need your legal, yeah.
Yes.
And do we have anything, I'm looking for landscape plan, which is under number 3. I'd like for it to say something about that the landscape needs to be maintained or replaced if it doesn't survive. And I don't know, there was a question about the rain garden, if we needed to mention that it doesn't, that it needs.
He said they have to get approval every year.
On the rain garden? Okay,
But that is a good idea to add something, that the
okay.
landscaping has to be maintained and replaced.
Like in the,
I thought we had a requirement for that.
well, I do, we did, but it's not showing up in this. So, under 3, after the word parking area, all landscaping shall be maintained and or replaced. Would that cover it? Okay. Any other changes? I'll check my notes.
One other question, Madam Chairman. Under number 4, it's a specification of materials and colors. They're supposed to provide material samples prior to final approval by the Planning Commission. Prior approval of what? Not the special use permit? Or is
No.
that what you mean?
Our intent was, this had not been provided to us, only the renderings had, so our suggestion was either bring material samples or label the renderings such as they have with what's in front of you. So that meets the requirement in our mind. They've already done that. They've provided you with detailed materials on each elevation.
So you're essentially talking about approval of the special use permit.
Correct.
Leave number 4 in.
Yeah, it was an and/or. They could either bring the samples or provide details, and this sheet does it in our mind.
So then we don't need it. If everyone is in. Yes.
I think it's probably best to leave it in just to document that this is what's being approved with what they've submitted.
And the last thing is the lighting. Just if we want to make any kind of additional recommendation for the lighting and the directional lighting.
I would say any new lighting needs to be directional lighting.
High cutoff.
Yes.
Spreading out, it cuts off directly.
I'd also say the applicant make a good faith effort to replace the existing lighting with directional lighting if it's cost effective to do so. Is that okay? I said, any new lighting is going to be directional lighting. And the applicant will make a good faith effort to replace existing lighting with directional lighting if it is cost effective.
Yes, I would agree with that. On the directional lighting, if we can, because I'm not an expert at it, but it would be more tennis court specific lighting. And then also the directional lighting for pickleball courts, because obviously you don't have to have lights really high, smaller area. But we would put in there tennis court specific to directional lighting, or that's made specifically for that, so that we're not promising something we can't deliver. But it is directional, and it is specifically done for tennis courts. Yep.
I would like
So we
to,
have made, Mitch, hi.
I would like to add about the lighting. Through the normal plan review process, we're going to require a lighting diagram be submitted to the Building Codes Department. You'll have to meet a 0-foot candles at the property line and have a lighting diagram to show that. And then it'll have to be tested at the final stage of development to ensure that it meets that 0-foot candles. That takes place through the normal permitting process, so. Well, through the plan review process with all the work that's taking place, we will get a lighting design put together and make sure that it meets that.
And that was the addition of saying, and the applicant will make a good faith effort to replace lighting if
Yes.
cost effective. So we're hoping everything will work out, okay? So what I have is that we have amended, if you'll take a look at your recommendations, Mr. Holsing. Wait a minute, you're getting consulted. Mr. Holloman. Mr. Holsing, Mr. Holloman. Just wanted to go over the recommendations and the changes we've made to them, so you're clear that we have added to number 3 that all the landscape will be maintained, landscaping will be maintained or replaced, okay? Under number H, we've granted, 6H, we've granted 5 years with the reevaluation of all conditions and shall be renewed. Can't read my own writing. If all and renewed and approved if all conditions have been met. Yeah, thank you. And then a number 7 item, that any new directional lighting will be directional. Any new lighting will be directional, and the applicant will provide good faith effort to replace any other lighting with spillage if cost effective. Okay? Have we got everything? Think we got everything?
Madam Chair, at this point, I'll move to approve PC 2018-201 with the staff's recommendations as amended.
Moved by Mr. Wolf, seconded by Mr. Brenneman. Any further discussion? Mr. Brewster, do you have anything else you want to say?
This is a recommendation to the city council who makes the final decision on it, which would be May 21st.
May 21st at 7 p.m.?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. May 21st at 6 p.m. Okay, thank you. Seeing no other discussion, I'll ask for the vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. And it is unanimous, motion passed. Thank you. I think everything is going to work out for you. I really do. So thanks. Appreciate everybody coming. And that is the end of our Planning Commission meeting. So we'll let the room clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy I could help. Yeah. If you ever need anything else, just let me know. Yes. Yep. It'll be in the ordinance that goes to the city council.
It'll be in the city council packet.
Yeah, it'll be in the packet. We put it on the website.
But I stumbled over it.
The Thursday before May 21st is when it goes on the website, so that would be May 17th. By the end of the day, it'll all be on there.
Thank you so much for coming. If you could clear the room and visit outside, we'll do a little bit more business here. Thank you so much. So glad you could come. Thank you. We'll wave too. Okay, would the secretary tell us what's coming up?
So the application deadline for June actually isn't until this Friday, so I can't tell you what's on the agenda next month yet. It'll be a surprise. I do think the final development plan for the car wash is coming through. We've heard from them. Chris, have you heard from anyone else?
There may be a variance request coming as well.
Oh, yes. We believe it is. And then as far as an update on the neighborhood design regulations, we did go present that to the city council. They had a lot of recommendations for the committee to go back and take a look at. So the committee has met again, taken a look at some of the recommendations, changed a few of their recommendations, and we're planning to move forward with presenting that to the city council again on June 4th. And Chris can tell you a little bit more about
Yeah.
what
Most of the concerns and questions dealt with some of the garage limitations, particularly whether, I think it was even like down to the extent of the door sizes, and so the committee relooked at that, and we're going with industry standards basically on door sizes, so it was just little details like that. There was a revisiting of should any lots be allowed to have 3 forward-facing garages, and so the idea was, well, the R1A lots where it's already existing in some places, the committee relooked at that. And then the last one, kind of more significant one, was dealt with the 60% lot coverage in relation to front lots, and particularly on busy streets. We went back and revisited our numbers, and they seemed about right, but we put in a little bit more criteria to allow, if there was a situation to get parking and adequate access to the property, if they needed to go over that it wasn't going to be too onerous for them. So those were the 3 main things that we relooked at.
yes, go ahead and move forward and have some open houses about this and get feedback from the residents. And if we move forward with that, we may do some changes to the regulations based on the feedback we get then. And then it would actually come back to the planning commission and the council for a public hearing and formal approval, because it is amending the zoning regulations. So there's 20-day public notice requirements, all that stuff we'd have to follow. So I don't know what the timeline is at this point or where it's going, but we'll see. We're all along for the ride. So, and then a comp plan update. Chris is going to give a presentation to the city council next Monday, May 7th. May 7th, is that right? About your recommendation at your last planning commission meeting to move forward with updating that. So stay tuned for what comes of that. I'm sure you'll read about it somewhere. So
Thank you.
we'll see.
And the next meeting is on June 4th, did you say?
Yes, oh no, that's the council meeting. It's on June 5th, I believe. And then just so you all remember, technically our next meeting would be July 3rd, but we rescheduled that back in January for July 10th, since it's the day before 4th of July. So. We didn't expect we'd get a quorum if we had it on July 3rd, so.
Well, I think all went fairly well this evening. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your expertise. Anything else to come before the Planning Commission? All right, then we are adjourned. Do we want a motion? We can do this formally, or we can just adjourn. Do you need a motion? You don't care? No, we don't care. Okay. Thank you.
The report said they're staying where they are,